So whenever you're ready, you may begin.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to class. I want us to think before we get started today. I want to do a little reflection of what we mastered yesterday. So here's kind of a map of where we're going. We're going to summarize yesterday. We're going to do our mind mover, and then we're going to dive into today's topic. So yesterday, I'll remind you all what we were talking about. We were talking about where people access food and where our food comes from. So who can show me or tell me this morning what's one of the locations that we get our food from? Right.
The grocery store.
The grocery store, perfect. Can anyone think of any other locations we get food? Yeah.
Farmer's market?
Definitely a farmer's market.
A garden.
The garden, perfect. Any other thoughts? Lots of different locations to get food. Convenience stores were on there, specialty stores, talking about all different places where we can get food. And we were really looking at where we can get food on a local level. And that's where we have been focused for most of our class. But as you know, that this class is called Global Food Production, and we're going to start reaching out a little more into thinking globally. So I've got our mind mover today. I'm going to pass out this worksheet so you can start looking at the screen. And I just want you to start thinking about what's going on here. Just think to yourself. And on the top of your mind mover, you're going to write 2 important takeaways from this website, and then we're going to talk about it together. So just take a look at the screen, think about what's going on here, and then write it down for me. There's 4 of and give you about 30 seconds to write down the 2 important takeaways from the website. About 5 more seconds to finish up those thoughts. All right, so who is willing to share what one of the important takeaways were that you gathered from the website? Heather.
I think it's really important that there is more births, like a faster birth rate than there is a death rate.
Very good, yeah, that's one of the really interesting facts on here. If you look down here, we can see that a birth is happening every 8 seconds. So if we just waited 8 seconds, boom, there's a birth. And it's faster than the death rate, so that's really important to know. So our population is probably increasing faster than it's decreasing. What's another takeaway that we gathered from here? Yes?
The world's population never stops. Sure.
Definitely, yeah. Look how fast this is ticking. And same with the United States population. They're both increasing, and it's ticking pretty rapidly, I would say. Any other takeaways that we want to mention here about what's going on the website? Who can tell me where this information is coming from? Yeah?
The United States Census.
Absolutely. And so the United States Census is it's a bureau that collects this type of data and information that we can look at and analyze. So that's a really important thing to note down too, of where your data that you're looking at is coming from. So we've got the world population here, and we're showing that it's ticking. Now how does this relate to our global food class? Why do we care about this number that keeps changing before we can write it down? Why do we care about this? Yeah, Justine.
Because we have to feed all those people.
Absolutely. So in a global class about food, we're concerned mostly about how we're going to feed this increasing number. So it's a little intimidating for agriculturalists, but it's a task that we're challenged with and we're going to be able to succeed with. So let's get back on here. So that really leads us into today's topic. We're really concerned with the global the global population rising, and us as people interested in food and agriculture, we're concerned with being able to feed that population. Before we can really look at how that relationship exists, we're going to start talking about supply and demand relationships, and we're going to eventually get to a really awesome stat that we can visually see and show how food production and population are related. So before we can do that, let's look at today's objectives and see what we're trying to aim at today. By the end of today, you should be able to draw a supply and demand curve and be able to explain the relationships. And you can see on your paper we've got some definitions, we'll be drawing some graphs, so you'll be able to see that. And then we'll also talk about the Malthusian trap theory, and that's a really neat, interesting approach to look at of how we are able to feed that global population that we saw ticking away there. So those are our objectives for the day. The first thing we're going to start off with is some definitions. Since we're going to be talking about relationships, we need to know what the terms are and what we're talking about. So the first thing on your paper there is demand. Does anyone know what demand is, or who can give me a basic definition of demand? Sure.
When somebody wants something or when a group of people want something.
Definitely. And what is something that you might demand? What do you need?
Freedom, and.
Try to think on like a food level.
If I go to the grocery store, I often go for like milk.
Yes, yeah, so demand is definitely something that we're looking for. So what I have here is the definition. The demand of something is really just the quantity of a product or service that's desired. So it's how much of that you're looking for. So you said every time you go to the grocery store, you buy milk, that's one of your demands. And how much milk do you get? We all demand a different quantity of that. The next thing that goes hand in hand with demand, next on your sheet, who can tell me what that is?
Supply.
Supply, perfect. And who thinks they know the definition of supply? Sure.
It's what's available to be sold.
Absolutely. So here's what we've got on here. How much the market can offer, what is available of a particular good. Perfect. So I'll let you write that down. And who can think of something, what is an example of something that's supplied? Someone tell me?
Also milk?
Yeah, definitely, exactly. That's a great point because the market supplies what we demand. Perfect. So these two things go hand in hand. They have an awesome relationship, and we're going to see that in just a few minutes. But I just want to get through some of these definitions first to get the basics. Have you guys seen these in your economics classes before? Is this something that looks familiar?
Yes.
I thought so, yeah. So we're definitely getting a little intracurricular here. So next is the law of demand, and it's the higher the price of a good, the less people will demand the good. That's the law of demand. I'll give you a sec to write it down. Perfect. And who can give me an example of when the law of demand has happened to them? The higher the price, the less you demand it. Can anyone think of an example? Sure.
So the other day, me and my family, we were at the grocery store, and as everyone knows, yesterday was World Series, so we were gonna cook steaks. And the steaks were on sale at Publix, and it was really expensive. So we decided that we weren't going to purchase a steak, but purchase ground beef and make hamburgers. So the more expensive the steak was, the less we wanted to buy it.
Absolutely. And beyond food, there's so many different things that this applies to. Maybe ladies think of like your jewelry. The higher the price something is, the less you really think you need it. So that was a perfect example. Thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we're going to talk about the law of supply. This one's really interesting to wrap your head around. The higher the price, the more quantity supplied. And I put like a little hint in here too to help you understand the law of supply. Producers want to make their product for the best price. So if you were a producer and saw that the price of something is really high, people want to supply more of that because they want more of that food dollar. So that's a little snippet on the law of supply. Next we have equilibrium, and this will be definitely more explained when we can put the words into a picture. Who can read the definition of equilibrium for me? Sure, thank you.
Supply and demand are equal.
Definitely. So when supply and demand are equal, we're at equilibrium, there is the same amount of demand for what the market is willing to supply. And whatever supplied, consumers are gonna buy that up and we're very equal. That's where we want our market. We want the consumers to be happy. We want them to purchase the products that the suppliers are making. And the suppliers will be happy too because there's not a waste, there's not a shortage. Everything is balanced. Equilibrium, think equal. Equal between the producers and the consumers. Next is disequilibrium, and this is just the opposite, when the price and quantity are not equal. And we'll see these on our graphs. We'll show you some examples of when the market isn't equal. And there's either too much demand or maybe there's too much supply. Does everyone have that written down? All right, so since we have some definitions, Bill, I think we're ready to start looking at some examples. But first I want to demonstrate to you how to appropriately draw a supply and demand curve. So there's 4 steps, and I have your 4 listed there, of how to draw the supply and demand curve. So who can read step 1 for me? Yes, Brett.
Draw axis.
Perfect. So when you draw a supply and demand curve, you're basically drawing your axis. And think right here, what does this remind you of if I extended these lines here? What does that look like? If I extend it out like that. Yeah, it's a graph. So we're basically graphing. We're just choosing to use this axis right here. So the first step, you draw your axes to show your relationship. Let's quickly review which one's X and which one's Y for our axis.
X is the horizontal one, Y is the vertical.
Perfect. Does anyone know any fun things you can think of to help you remember which one's X and Y? Y to the sky. That's what I always think of. So Y to the sky, you put your Y up there, and X to the left. That might help, but if you remember Y to the sky, you should get X to the left. After that, after we draw our axes, that was step 1. Now we're going to label our axes, because it's really important when you have a relationship on here that they are appropriately labeled. So whoever you're showing this data to can really see and understand it. So we're going to label these. For when we're talking about economic relationships, we usually look at price and quantity. So price is going to be on this axis. So price and quantity are on here, perfect. So after you have your axes drawn and your axes labeled, next you can draw or graph your curves. So by doing that, you just look at whatever relationship you're looking at. I'll give you different phrases, or you point and graph your data. So say you had different price values on here and different quantity values, and you just basically graph whatever you're given. And then lastly, you identify your relationship. So after you have some sort of graph or curve on here, you're looking at what relationship exists. So who can think back to math class here? We have what kind of relationship?
A positive one.
Perfect, a positive, and this would be? Negative. Right, so there's a lot of different graphs and relationships that we can show through this. I just quickly, before we start drawing some of these relationships, we're talking about math class and we're touching on economics. Why do we care about using different disciplines and helping show agriculture? What's the importance of what we're doing here in relation to global food? Why would agriculturalists want to understand how price and quantity are shown on here?
I mean, it's just like we've talked about in previous classes, that, agriculturalists are business people, so they're selling and marketing a product, so they imagine that they probably would need this to prepare for their business.
Perfect. Thank you, Brett. Yeah, so we're interested in understanding these relationships so we know how much to produce, so we can see where we're at with the global economy. Perfect. So we're going to flip to the back of your worksheet now and look at the different curves we have on here today. So the first thing is a basic supply curve. We're just going to graph these together. So the basic supply curve, so as you're drawing these graphs, you can really quickly sketch them. You've got price here and quantity here. And the law of supply as we have on our sheet, states that as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. So this goes right with the law of supply. It's a positive relationship between price and quantity, is the law of supply. So that's all you have to sketch on there. And so then who can tell me, who can fill in the blanks with me? As price increases, perfect. The quantity supplied
Increases.
perfect. And that goes right along with the law of supply. So next we're going to take this to the right of our worksheet, and we are going to do the law of demand. So we've got price and quantity again.
It's opposite.
And perfect. I always, for a demand curve, it's always going that way to show the relationship of the law of demand. And to help remember that, I always remember downward demand, and that helps me remember that the D is usually down here. So price and quantity, and we've got demand, and it shows the law of demand's relationship again. So as quantity demanded,
Decrease.
is the quantity demanded increases, right? The price decreases. Perfect. You said decreases, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So that goes right along with the law of demand. As the quantity demanded increases, the price of that will decrease. So next, we're just going to slap these together. Is everyone with me right now? Does anyone need me to slow down a little bit? Okay. To showcase these relationships together, you just simply overlap the graphs. So we've got price and quantity. Let's first do supply. We just copy our supply curve from above with an S, showcasing as price increases, we're going to supply that quantity. And then we're going to put our downward demand on here, showcasing that as the quantity increases, the price is going to go down. Who could flip back for me? Remember we talked about equilibrium and disequilibrium. Who can remind us of what equilibrium meant?
And the supply and demand are equal.
Perfect. So when the supply and demand are equal, where on this relationship do we see that supply and demand are the same? Yeah, right where they intersect. So right here, that is the point of equilibrium. And we can label that with a little EQ, just so you can keep it on there. And so let's talk about this relationship and fill in our blanks on that worksheet. So as the price increases, let's all think about if this price is increasing, the supply is also increasing, perfect, and demand is what? Decreasing. So we're just overlapping these relationships. So this is how a typical supply and demand curve, this is what it looks like. So let's think about our disequilibrium when they're not equal would be every other point where they're not equal. So if a test question had put a point on the graph where there is not equilibrium, you can mark anywhere where it's just a single line. And if I asked for equilibrium, you would want to put where they're equal and where they're intersecting. So the next relationship we're going to talk about is Malthusian's trap theory. And this is where it really starts relating to our global food class and why we care so much about the relationship of supply and demand. So say that this was the quantity of food. And say that this was time. The Malthusian trap theory states that the food produced is here. Is everyone with me? We've got the quantity of food, the time, and this is our food produced over time. Now, Thomas Malthus said that the Malthusian trap theory is that the food required looks like this. That's the food required. And so where they intersect right here is called the Malthusian trap. I'm just going to abbreviate there because you've got it written below for you. So the Malthusian trap is saying that the food required is exceeding our food produced in this area here. As the food required increases, the food produced is also what though? Increasing. So why is this relationship relationship so important? They're both increasing, but what's the difference here?
Is increasing faster than the other.
Absolutely. Just because two people are running at the same speed just because two people are running doesn't mean they're running at the same speed. And that's the problem going on here. We're producing food, no question about it. But remember that world clock we were looking at? That population and the food required is a lot higher than the food that we're actually producing right now. So that's the Malthusian trap theory. Here's to fill in your blanks on that. When food required exceeds the food produced. Thomas Malthus in 1978. What's the significance that this was thought about in 1798? What's the significance? What year is it now?
16.
Yeah, and so for this to be thought about so many years ago, they kind of saw it coming, so that's why we've always been working as agriculturalists for efficiency, for good food, for growing as much as we can, and for always thinking, agriculturalists have always been thinking, how are we going to meet that supply? How can we meet these infinite needs with these limited resources? So that's the Malthusian trap theory. And it's really important to us to think about that because the food produced and the food required is what we're really concerned about, because we want what? We want equilibrium. We want to be able to supply and demand and have that balance in the marketplace, but here we really don't have that balance between food produced and food supplied. So yes, they're increasing at different speeds. So I know this is a lot to take on today, and we kind of went over and touched on hopefully some familiar content, and then we introduced this new idea of the Malthusian trap theory, where food required and food produced are not equal, and that's why it's so important to talk about in our global food class. So let's recap. Hopefully after today you're able to draw some of these supply and demand curves. And I'll take a look at your worksheets to make sure that we're all on the same page. Make sure you study and look at those and make sure if you understand the relationships of the law of supply and the law of demand and truly know those, you'll be able to draw these curves just like that. And then being able to explain the Malthusian trap theory. I really quickly want to do a think, pair, share. So just think to yourself really quick, what is the Malthusian trap theory? Take 15 seconds to think about that to yourself. All right, and then go ahead and share with a partner. Make sure both people say their answers. What is the Malthusian trap theory?
World is doomed. We do not have enough food for all the poor people in China and India.
All right, it kind of sounds like we're done with the think pair. So now it's time to share what group really thinks they really understand Malthusian trap. Brett?
So Heather and I just had an epiphany. We started thinking about that world clock and how this trap is really, we really have to focus on agriculture and producing enough food for everyone, especially if that time is keep ticking.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so does any other group want to share any other thoughts on the Malthusian trap theory? Are you sure?
No, I mean, yeah. So the Malthusian trap, we were thinking about how that's kind of what's going on right now. The food that's produced is not keeping up as fast with the food that's required because of how high the population is.
Absolutely. So this is all really important for us to take on. It seems like a lot. But what's really exciting in this class is we're going to start looking at more in depth with this relationship specifically. I wanted to review supply and demand so we can really look at this relationship and what we can do about it. We've presented an issue, and in the next few weeks of the class, we're going to learn how to figure out and solve this issue and maybe even brainstorm some ideas. And that's one of our cornerstone tasks in the future. So that's it. Thank you.